So now that we've identified what types of institutions there are, we're going to be talking about figuring out what institution is a good fit for you. Some of you may be selected several different types of institutions. 73% of you indicated you wanted to apply to our institution, so similar to UT Austin. 77%, so slightly more, indicated you want to apply to research and teaching institutions. And then 25% of you said you would want to apply to teaching-only institutions, so like Austin Community College. And then when it came to describing the differences between how these institutions prioritize, I'm impressed. 53% of you said yes, you could describe that, while 41% of you said you were not sure. So let's see if I can expand your knowledge of how these different institutions prioritize different skills when they're hiring. So here's a quote from a previous workshop or panel that we had last year, and we'll share that with students afterwards in an email. You can hear what the panelists had to say about the job search. But Professor Daniel Usera from Austin Community College had this to say about identifying fit. You have to decide what is your purpose with your PhD. There's teaching, research, and service. What appeals to you the most? And you need to find the institution that fulfills that purpose for you. You have to figure out what it is that really drives you and makes you feel significant, because there's a difference between success and significance. Don't feel like there's only one right way to be a scholar. So we're going to talk about identifying that fit where you can feel significant at the institution that you're at. So if you've been to any career workshops before, you may have heard this, that your ideal job lies at the intersection of your skills, interests, and values. We're going to focus mostly on skills today and talk about how they relate to qualifications that universities are expecting. But I did want to touch upon interests and values, which are really important as well when you're considering what is a good fit for you. So interests could include any activities like academic writing, attending conferences, developing curricula for classes, editing and revising writing for papers or books, leading or supervising others, motivating or coaching, serving on committees, teaching, training, or mentoring, and working with underserved communities. I want you to think about sort of these interests and kind of what stands out to you, and we can talk later about an assessment you can do to really identify these. And how are you going to find a university that caters to these interests, where you can do these very often? And then there's values, and that's really going to be reflected in the institution as well, and your academic job search. So first, location. Are you willing to, work in the Pacific Northwest at a university, or, the Midwest, or do you want to stay in Austin or go back home? What kind of compensation are you willing to have, what your salary is? What do you want the diversity of the institution to look like? How much autonomy do you want to have in your research and your teaching? What kind of impact do you want your work to have? What variety do you want to have in your day-to-day work? How much risk and competition can you take on when it comes to research? And then kind of your environment, how much collegiality do you want, with other professors or students, and the opportunity for collaboration and to develop community. Think about these values and what's really important for you to have every single day at work. And think about that when you're exploring these different universities. So when it comes to identifying your skills to determine institutional fit, I would recommend using these two websites. These websites cover the entire career spectrum, from academic to industry to business to nonprofit and government. But a lot of these skills and interests that are on these two websites also are highly related to careers in academia. And when you take these assessments, they'll say, oh, it looks like you're strongly suited to a research-intensive role, or you're strongly suited to a teaching-intensive role. And so I recommend taking these skills assessments. Imagine PhD is built for humanities and social sciences, and it was worked on by our director, Annie Maxfield. And then my IDP Science Careers is more for biomedical sciences, but I have seen engineering students use it as well, and it's been helpful. So when you do these skills assessments, it's going to rank your skills from you have never done this or you don't think you're very good at it to you think you can do it really well and you want to do it often. And so I want you to think about your skills right now, just looking at, this is a subset of skills that is discussed in those assessments, but I want you to look at the skills in all of these different categories: research, oral, written, management, leadership, and professional, and think about, pick like 3 skills that you think you are really good at and are going to matter in your academic job search. We're going to think about how these skills align with research, teaching, and service, which are really 3 areas that you can also think about, like a framework to think about each institution and what is sort of their emphasis on research versus teaching versus service. So under research skills, creativity and innovation definitely does align with research, teaching, and service, but also kind of, I would bring it also into service, kind of how can you contribute to an institution to, make it better and to expand into what they offer. Forming and defending independent conclusions and navigating the publication process are obviously very important in research. In oral skills, teaching in a classroom setting is going to be big for teaching experience, as well as training and mentoring individuals. That really comes in RT institutions where there's an emphasis on teaching people in the lab or teaching people through research. And then presenting research to academics is going to be more common in research positions. Grant proposals are going to be what will fund your research. So if you have that skill, that's very important to have. And we're seeing now during COVID, using digital tools for communication is incredibly essential for teaching. And we're probably going to see a long-term impact of how we teach courses online or create more resources online to better serve our students. So if that's a skill that you have, that is really going to help you with teaching, especially in this job market right now. Intensive writing and editing is going to be more involved in research. So when you're writing grants or when you're writing publications, that will come up. And then under management, developing and managing budgets, supervising and training, and managing data and resources, all of those are really kind of part of the supervising role that people take on in research. So with their resources, with their students, with their equipment, all of those elements are really important for research. For leadership, creating vision and goals is incredibly important for research, to have a long-term agenda and sort of how are you going to contribute to the discipline. Providing constructive feedback and leading and motivating others is a huge part of teaching. And then for service, cultural competence and contributing to an institution. So service is really going to be about how can you, serve on committees, reevaluate curriculum, get involved in mentoring or student organizations to really serve your students. And then contributing to a discipline is going to come up with more research. Can you expand the boundaries of how we think about a specific field? So now we're going to qualifications for different types of institutions. And I'm going to discuss the major qualifications that are considered and then talk about the skills that are involved in each of those qualifications. So for a research-intensive institution like R1 or R2, these are the major 6 factors that they are thinking about. They're thinking about research vision, research independence, research communication, publications, a funding plan, and teaching experience or interest. And I'll talk more about these. So when it breaks down these qualifications into specific skills, and all of these skills are from Imagine PhD or My IDP, so you can even take those assessments and see what are my top skills and what qualifications do they align with. So for research vision, skills involved are having the ability to create vision and goals, to contribute to a discipline, and to plan and organize your research. And the key question you want to ask yourself when you're applying to these R institutions is there a clear direction to your research that addresses open questions in the field in a feasible way? And think about that financially and also think about that in terms of funding. And we'll talk about funding. With research independence, the skills required are to be able to form and defend independent conclusions, to work effectively with no supervision, and to be creative and innovative. And the real question they ask is, can you depart from your advisor's research field and expand upon what you did in your dissertation, or even move into a new field? If you're in STEM and your dissertation is too tied to your advisor, can you kind of find a new field, a new niche to call your own and really be in charge of your entire agenda there? Can you have the independence to do that without any supervision? Other qualifications that they're asking for are research communication, which requires being able to speak clearly and effectively and to present research to academics. And at our institutions, when they think about research communication, they're asking, can you spark interest in other experts in the field? Can you make them think, oh, this institution is doing really exciting work. It's very prestigious. And then with publications, skills required for that are intensive writing and editing, navigating the publication process, and contributing to a discipline. And here institutions are going to be asking, do you have first author papers? And are they either published in high impact journals, or have they contributed significantly to a field? Have they been published in significant lower impact but significant journals that are specific to your subdiscipline? Then with funding plans, skills involved are writing grant proposals, being able to make persuasive arguments, and to contribute to a discipline. So you have to ask yourself, do you have a realistic plan for how your research will be funded? What grants are you going to apply for? How is your research going to be different and realistic with the funding that you can get and the time that you have, but also exciting enough that it's going to get other academics to sign on and support your funding? And then last, teaching experience or interest. This can be extremely variable by discipline, and I'll talk about that more. The skills that you can break those down into are speaking clearly and effectively, teaching in a classroom setting, and planning and organizing courses. And at the R level, they're going to be asking, have you had some experience with organizing or teaching a course? And what are your plans to transition to being fully responsible for a course? So these are other anecdotes. I'll be using these throughout the presentation from professors or people in leadership roles at our institutions. So from Christine Ormsby at Oklahoma State University, which is R1, she says, having an articulated research agenda is what's important. Your dissertation is your ticket to play in the party, but it is not the end of your career as a researcher. What we see is faculty candidates come in and all they can talk about is their dissertation. Your agenda, which is the big questions you want to answer, the research projects you will do. People struggle with completing that part of it, and they can't articulate it when they're on campus. Really think bigger picture. It starts to help us see you as a scholar. So it's getting back into research vision. Can you expand your dissertation to a broader 5-year or longer plan for what research will look like when you're at that institution? And then when we're getting into discipline specific, humanities and STEM can differ more at the R level. And so this is from Chris Rios at Baylor University, which is R2. He said when he talked to professors at Baylor, they said that on the humanities side, what's required are publications. Everyone who came had publications, but the teaching is also really important. What also came up is service. We look for people who are already engaging in professional societies or service at the university. However, on the STEM side, absolutely you have to have publications. All of our recent hires have had postdocs to demonstrate their research chops, that their research was fundable, that they could secure external grants for their research. We don't expect a lot of teaching experience on the STEM side, but we expect to see someone who has the presence and the command of the room to demonstrate that they would be good teachers. So that's something that you should be aware of. If you're humanities, you should be thinking about your teaching experience if you want to go to an art institution and what you can bring to the table. STEM teaching is going to be less important. You are going to have to teach, but that will not be something that they consider to the same degree as humanities. They'll really just want to be able to see that you can communicate effectively. So moving into teaching-only institutions, which are at the other end of the spectrum, there are really only 3 qualifications that they're looking for: teaching experience, pedagogy or teaching practices, and commitment to serving diverse students. So for teaching experience, when you break it down into skills, that comes into teaching in a classroom setting and planning and organizing courses. So what you need to ask yourself is, do you have experience with full responsibility of organizing and teaching a course? That is absolutely essential. And also, they want to see that you've taught people at that level of the teaching. So if you still have a few more years to go until you're ready to apply, think about teaching a course at Austin Community College or other colleges at that level, or having multiple different types of teaching experience. They are also looking for pedagogy and teaching practices. So specifically, can you implement active learning strategies and develop new teaching skills? So they're going to be asking, can you adapt your teaching practices continuously to improve the curriculum and learning? And if you haven't been to the Faculty Innovation Center, I want to give a huge shout out to them right now. They have an entire teaching preparation course with multiple segments to talk about active learning strategies, how to engage students, and that's run by Laura Struve. And she'll also be teaching some workshops on the academic job search later this summer. So if you have no experience with pedagogy, I would recommend to start going to this faculty innovation courses and start to learn about active learning strategies and teaching techniques. Finally, commitment to serving diverse students. Because tea institutions have a variety of students from a variety of backgrounds, and some may be non-traditional students, older or part-time, they really want you to have cultural competence and that you can contribute to an institution and create resources or plans or systems that are going to support the success of those students. So you have to ask yourself, can you implement strategies that will support learning of diverse populations? So from Daniel Usera, again at Austin Community College, he says that in community colleges, the expectations for a professor is going to be teaching and service. At ACC, our teaching load is 5-5-2. That's 5 courses in the fall and spring and 2 courses in the summer. When you design your curriculum, it will be more standardized because community colleges have curriculum that is transferable to universities. Part of the teaching expectations is that you follow the departmental curricula that are established, that may be using the established textbooks. In our department, there are also required assignments to give. You can decide how you do things, but there are some things you have to do in your classroom. So it's going to be something really important to consider is how are you going to work it within the system that community colleges have developed, especially if they have state funding. There are specific textbooks that they use to make sure that there's a transferability for the students to go from community college to 4-year institutions. So how can you adapt your teaching and your teaching practices to make sure that students are learning this content, some of which is going to be determined ahead of time? Okay, research and teaching institutions are very exciting. They're really a mashup of both research and teaching. There's a lot of different things you kind of need to have under handle. So like research institutions, they're going to be looking at your research vision, your independence, your communication, your publications. Like teaching institutions, they're going to be looking at your teaching experience or interest, your pedagogy or teaching practices, and your commitment to serving diverse students. But 2 new factors that come up in RT institutions is research feasibility and student research training or mentoring. And that speaks back to the fact that they're serving master's and undergraduate students in their research. How are you going to work within a work with less funding and younger, less experienced students to do research? So breaking down some of these new skills or the different ways that they're going to view these skills. So the ones I haven't covered, the ones I'm not talking about, they're the same as for research and teaching, research intensive or teaching only. But the few new things that you have to consider if you're looking at RT institutions is first, research communication. Can you speak clearly and effectively and present research to a general audience? So here you see the difference with an art institution is they want you to excite people who are other people in the field to gain interest in the research that you're doing at that university, while RT institutions, they want you to excite interest in your undergraduate and master's students. When you have a lecture and you mention the work that you're doing in the lab, or any archival work or qualitative research, when you bring that up to students, is that going to cause the student to come up to you at the end of the class and say, I'm really interested in helping you and working on that project? That's what RT institutions care about. They also are really mindful of research feasibility. There are fewer resources. They are not spending $5 million or more on research every year. So you have to think about how can you tailor your research to work with the institution's resources and also tailor it to the institution's populations. You are not going to be able to produce a Nature paper in 3 years at an RT institution. You have to think about what kind of experiments your students can do. So probably not mouse work. They're probably going to be working with, if you're in STEM, model organisms like C. elegans or zebrafish or yeast. You have to really think about how you can change your research plan to address the fact that there's limited resources or the population. Same with humanities, kind of what's the ability to pay for to pay to go into the field internationally and bring students along with you. That's going to be less likely of a possibility based on the funding. And then student research training or mentoring is absolutely critical. They view the student research process as an integral part of the learning experience at RT institutions. So you need to be able to train and mentor individuals in research, people who are likely brand new to research, have not done it before, and also be able to provide constructive feedback. And you have to ask yourself, do you have a research mentoring philosophy for students who aren't PhD, who are getting started in the world of research? So this is from Tracy Delgado, who is an associate professor at Seattle Pacific. She said, for RT institutions, teaching is number one. You could have 1 million publications, it doesn't matter. If you don't have that passion to teach, you're not going to make it through. Research is also important. That is the second thing that they look at.